The Gemara in Brachos on Daf Vov darshans the pasuk, Vayashkem Avraham baboker el hamakom asher omad sham. Says the Gemara, Ein amida el tefillah shenemar vayamod Pinchas vayipalel. So we see that by Avraham and by Pinchas, the way that they davened was be'amida, standing. In fact, we know that the main kiyum of the mitzvah of tefillah is through the Shemona Esrei, which is referred to as the Amida. So what is it about standing that is so integral to tefillah? Why is the tefillah of Avram specifically ba'amida? Why did Pinchas daven be'amida? So there are many suggestions, or one could think of a number of different suggestions to create some type of fundamental link between tefillah and amida. For instance, we know that Rav Chaim Soloveitchik famously writes that if a person doesn't feel that they're omeid lifnei hamakom, then they're lacking in the most basic definition of tefillah, that tefillah means to be omeid lifnei hamakom. So that could be one reason why the ikar tzura, the primary form of tefillah, is be'amida, because that's what tefillah is. Tefillah at its core is standing before God, to feel that one's in God's presence. But I'd like to share another perspective, and that is something that has to do with amida, standing, and the nature of mankind. The Mabit, the Maharal, they write that one of the most primary manifestations of man's elevation over all other creations, over the animal world, meaning what makes man a unique being, a distinct and transcendent being, and not just a sophisticated animal, is the fact that most animals, when they walk, they face downward. A dog, a cat, an ant, all of these animals, because they walk on four legs, so they're face down. And their heads are basically on the same level, the same plane as the rest of their bodies. Some a little bit more elevated, some a little bit less. But the construction of an animal, with its head on the same plane and facing down, in some way represents the fact that an animal is a this-world creation. It doesn't transcend. Yet man, who stands upright with his head perched above the rest of his body, so it represents the fact that the headquarters of his soul, his mind, the most elevated part of man, so perched above the rest of the physical body and upward facing. So it represents the fact that man is a transcendent being. He's not only a this world being, but there's a otherworldliness to him. There's something that transcends the pure physical. There's something that can connect to God. So his body, his head, is situated closer towards the heavens. And Koma Sa'odam, the structure of man, represents man's elevated status in the world. Tefillah is also something that represents man's uniqueness. Only a human being is able to understand, even in a tiny degree that we can, but only a human can begin to understand the greatness of God, to understand our need to have such appreciation and thanks, hakaras hatov, for all of the good that Hashem does for us, to be able to understand that God is the source, or the address to turn to for our needs, to fulfill our desires, our hopes, our dreams. It's only the unique human mind that can begin to develop that type of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that appreciation, that knowledge of God. And therefore, if standing represents the unique human qualities that differentiate man from an animal, and tefillah is something that is only possible, it's an undertaking that only man can do. So perhaps it's extremely appropriate that the ikar tzura, the primary way that we daven, is the amida.